Good evening and welcome to First Baptist Church Azle Wednesday night Bible study. We're really glad to have you here tonight. We're all here to celebrate getting so much rain. It was actually sprinkled on me as I came down here tonight, so I'm ready for it. If we can all stand, we'll sing a couple of praise songs. Isn't it amazing what God can do when you ask? You just got to have the faith to ask. The chimes of time ring out the news, another day is through. Someone slipped and fell. Was that someone you? You may have longed for added strength, your courage to renew. Do not be disheartened, for I have news for you. It is no secret what God can do. What He's done for others, He'll do for you. With arms wide open, He'll pardon you. It is no secret what God can do. There is no night, for in His light you'll never walk alone. You'll always feel at home wherever you may roam. There is no power can conquer you while God is on your side. Just take Him at His promise. Don't run away and hide. It is no secret what God can do. What He's done for others, He'll do for you. With arms wide open, He'll pardon you. It is no secret what God can do. It is no secret what God can do. Amen. Well, y'all sound pretty good on that. I can tell you've been drinking more water. There's more liquid in your voice. We can change a couple of words to this so nobody has an excuse not to sing it. It's for everybody. I got to get the right chord. I'm only human. I'm just a mortal. Give me the strength and all I can be and all that I am. Show me the stairway that I have to climb. And for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that's all I'm asking of you. Just give me the strength to do every day what I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. Do you remember when you walked among men? Jesus, you know as you're looking below that it's worse now than then. All the pushing and shoving keeps clouding my mind. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. one day at a time, sweet Jesus. That's all I'm asking of you. Just give me the strength to do every day what I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. So for my sake, teach me to take one day at a time. Amen. You can have a seat.
All right, amen. Well, Ann, it must be a while since I've sung that song because I couldn't figure out what you changed. So,
Possibly I'm just a woman.
you're just a woman? It says that?
We sang it. I'm just immortal.
Immortal, okay. It actually said I'm just a woman?
Yeah, you could have said I'm just a woman.
Interesting. Well, I guess it has been a long time. All right, Ezra chapter 7. We're going to look at chapter 7 and chapter 8 tonight. As you're turning to chapter 7, I'll remind you the return to Jerusalem, to rebuild Jerusalem, took place in 3 phases with 3 different leaders at 3 different periods. All of them were under the leadership of Persian kings, which had taken over Babylon. And these 3 generations, or these 3 leaders, were under 3 different Persian kings. And all 3 kings, God led them to, or moved in their heart to let people come back. The first one that came back we saw in the last 2 or 3 weeks is Zerubbabel. He led a group of people back, a fairly large group of people back to rebuild the temple. The second group we're going to look at this week in 2 chapters this week, chapter 7 and 8, and next week, chapter 9 and 10, and that is Ezra and what Ezra did. And then after that, chapter 10 is the last chapter in the book of Ezra. We're going to look at the third phase, which was Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the wall around Jerusalem, which is a great story as well. So the first is Zerubbabel and the rebuilding of the temple. The second is Ezra as a spiritual leader to the people, and he really is key. We think of Zerubbabel in the temple and Nehemiah on the wall as being the big heavy hitters of the return, but in fact it was Ezra and what Ezra did, we'll see this week and next week, that made all the difference, because had Ezra not come back, I really think the new temple and Nehemiah's wall would have been all for nothing, and God would have allowed them to be destroyed as well. And so what Ezra did spiritually in the life of the people was just absolutely essential to keep them from going back to the same problem that they had before. All right, Ezra chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. After these things, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Zariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Shallum, the son of Zadok, the son of Ahitub, the son of Amariah, the son of Azariah, the son of Marioth, the son of Zerahiah, the son of Uzai, the son of Bukai, the son of Abishua, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the chief priest. Now, I know you may have got lost in that. Some of those may have been familiar to you, some are not. But if you remember anything out of that list, it's the last guy. Do you notice the last guy? That was Aaron, the first guy, the chief priest. So there were some priests in the Jewish remnant, by the way, who could not prove their ancestry. But Ezra was not among them. He had the best credentials and could prove his lineage all the way back to Aaron, the first high priest. Some famous spiritual leaders are named in this genealogy, men like Hilkiah, Zadok, and Phinehas. Of course, being blessed with godly ancestors is no guarantee of success for their descendants, but it's a good beginning. God promises to bless the descendants of the godly in Deuteronomy 4:40 and Psalms 128:1, which says, I don't know who my grandfather was. Oh, excuse me, that's not what Psalm 128 said. This is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln said, I don't know who my grandfather was, but he says, I'm much more concerned about what his grandson will be. Ezra knew the names of his ancestors and what these men had done, and he made the most of his heritage. I think for Jews especially, their heritage and their lineage was extraordinarily important for them, and he wanted to be able to trace his lineage back, as we see in the genealogies of Jesus in the Gospels as well. Verse 6, are we in verse 6? Yes, this Ezra came up from Babylon. He was a teacher well versed in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. Some of the Israelites, including priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, and temple servants, also came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Now that, again, is a very brief description of what happened, but it is significant. It was the year 458, and Artaxerxes I was king of Persia. This was nearly 60 years that had passed since the completion of the temple in Jerusalem. So the time from last week till tonight was 60 years, almost 60 years. So an entire generation and then some has passed since. So a group of Jews that had come back under the leadership of Zerubbabel have now been in Jerusalem for 68 years. In fact, most of them have probably died, and this is the next generation. You can imagine, I can only imagine their excitement after 60 years to see another group of Jews coming to town. And there's a lot of work still to do. The wall hasn't been done, and a lot of other things that have to be done. And so I'm sure it was a welcome group, even though it was not nearly as big of a group. It was then that God raised up Ezra to lead this group of refugees from Babylon to Judah to bring financial and spiritual support to the work and to help rebuild the city. Every person is important to God and God's work. But as Dr. Lee Robertson has often said, everything rises and falls with leadership. When God wanted to deliver Israel from Egypt, he raised up Moses and Aaron. When Israel was divided and defeated, he called Samuel to teach the word and David to serve as king. When God wants to judge a nation, he sends them inferior leaders, and we see that in Isaiah chapter 3, verse 1. But when he wants to bless them, he sends them men like Ezra. Verse 8, Ezra arrived in Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. He had begun his journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month, and he arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month, for the gracious hand of his God was on him. For Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. When you recall that Ezra was born in Babylon, you can better appreciate his achievement as a skilled student in Jewish scripture. Undoubtedly, some of the priests had brought copies of the Old Testament scrolls with them to Babylon, and these became very precious to the exiled spiritual leaders of the nation. There was no Jewish temple in Babylon, so Ezra has never seen a temple. And the priests and the Levites, by the way, were not obligated to minister when they were in Babylon, but some of them, like Ezra, devoted themselves to the study and to the teaching of the Word of God. There was a very clear preservation of the spiritual heritage of the Jewish nation while they were in captivity to Babylon, and that would prove essential for them coming back to Jerusalem. Otherwise, nobody knew what to do. So that leadership was already intact and prepared as they could be. But again, most of these Levites, these priests, these leaders who are going back to the temple have never seen the temple, have never served at any temple. And so it's all been hypothetical until now. Verse 11, this is a copy of the letter King Artaxerxes had given to Ezra, the priest and teacher, a man learned in matters concerning the commands and decrees of the Lord for Israel. So here's another letter. We get to read another letter tonight. This completely different king. This is Artaxerxes, king of kings. Well, that's humble. To Ezra the priest, a teacher of the law of the God of heaven. Greetings. Now I decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including priests and Levites who wish to go to Jerusalem with you, may go. You are sent by the king and his 7 advisors to inquire about Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God, which is in your hand. Moreover, you are to take with you the silver and gold that the king and his advisors have freely given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, together with all the silver and gold you may obtain from the province of Babylon, as well as the free will offerings of the people and priests for the temple of their God in Jerusalem. Now remember, 60 years ago when they came back with a lot of goodies as well, including all the furnishings for all the dishes, etc., for the temple that had been in the treasury of the king there in Babylon. And the king let them bring all of that back. Now, a generation later, he's sending them back with a different king, sending them back with a whole lot more money. Verse 16. If that's where I was, together with all the silver and gold you may obtain from the province of Babylon, as well as the free will offerings of the people, priests, and the temple of their God in Jerusalem. 17 is where it should have been. With this money, be sure to buy bulls, rams, and male lambs, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, and sacrifice them on the altar of the temple of your God in Jerusalem. Now, do you find something almost comical in that? They are being advised by a pagan king on how to give sacrifices to God. And he's right. He says, I'm giving you all this money. I want you to do, well, here's what I want you to do with it. I want you to buy a whole bunch of bulls and animals to sacrifice at the temple of your God. And why? Well, he has faith enough to know that he wants to be blessed because of it. Verse 18, you and your brother Jews may then do whatever seems best with the rest of the silver and gold in accordance with the will of your God. Deliver to the God of Jerusalem all the articles entrusted to you for worship in the temple of your God, and anything else needed for the temple of your God that you have occasion to supply. You may provide from the royal treasury. Now I, King Artaxerxes, order all the treasures of Trans-Euphrates to provide with diligence whatever Ezra the priest, a teacher of the law, the God of heaven, may ask of you, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of olive oil, and salt without limit. So he wants these supplies to be given by the leaders of the Trans-Euphrates area. Verse 23, whatever the God of heaven has prescribed, let it be done with diligence for the temple of the God of heaven. Why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and his sons? So here, this is a different king with different sons, but he doesn't want any animosity between him and his sons and the God of Israel. Verse 24, you are also to know that you have no authority. He's speaking to the leaders in Trans-Euphrates. You have no authority to impose taxes, tribute, or duty on any of the priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, temple servants, or other workers at this house of God. And you, Ezra, in accordance with the wisdom of your God, which you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to administer justice to all the people of the Trans-Euphrates, all who know the laws of your God. And you are to teach any who do not know them. Whoever does not obey listen to what he says, whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must surely be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment. That's pretty substantial, is it not? Like Darius before him, the previous king, Artaxerxes was anxious that the God of Israel bless him and his sons and give him success to his kingdom. So his generosity had some sort of selfish motive, but that selfish motive was a motive in faith. Obviously, if he had no faith in the God of Israel, he wouldn't care. He believes that there is a God of Israel, and he wants blessings from that God. It was remarkable that a pagan ruler would do this and be this generous toward a captive people from whom he could hope to gain nothing. He had nothing financial to gain from this at all, and yet he chose to do it anyway. Again, God just put it on his heart. You have to conclude that. Verse 27, Praise be to the Lord, the God of our fathers, who has put it into the king's heart to bring honor to the house of the Lord in Jerusalem in this way, and who has extended his good favor to me before the king and his advisors and all the king's powerful officials, because the hand of the Lord my God was on me. I took courage and gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. So just as God had worked in the heart and mind of Cyrus and Darius, so he moved upon Artaxerxes to permit Ezra and his people to return. After hearing Ezra's request, Artaxerxes took several steps to assist the Jews in this undertaking. The first was authorization. He appointed Ezra as the leader of the group and also as the king's agent in Judah, even to the extent of giving him the right to inflict capital punishment on offenders. From the way the king described Ezra in his official letter, it is clear that he was impressed with this Jewish priest scribe and the law, which was the center of his life and ministry. The references to the law of God being in Ezra's hand may refer to actual scrolls that Ezra may have brought with him for his audience with the king. The second thing we see is liberation. In his official letter, Artaxerxes gave the Jews the privilege to leave Babylon and to go to Jerusalem with Ezra and join the remnant in rebuilding the city walls. Keep in mind that it was the rebuilding of the city, not the temple, that was involved, along with the spiritual restoration of the people. Again, we'll see the building of the wall in 2 weeks, but tonight and next week, we see this spiritual restoration. And there was already a need for spiritual restoration, by the way. Didn't take one generation before there was a need. In 537, the first wave of Jewish refugees, about 50,000 of them, returned to Jerusalem under Zerubbabel's leadership, which we've already seen. So the first group, 50,000. Ezra was authorized to lead the second group, which was how many? Does anybody know? Instead of 50,000, it was 1,500 men plus women and children, to help restore the walls and gates and to bring spiritual renewal to the people. In 444, Nehemiah would arrive and finish the job of building the walls and hanging the gates. All right, that's Ezra chapter 7. I know that was quick. Any comments or questions before we look at chapter 8? And it's just going to continue, of course. All right, chapter 8, verse 1. These are the family heads and those registered with them who came up with me from Babylon during the reign of Artaxerxes. Well, just for fun, I'm going to read a verse or two and then give up. Of the descendants of Phinehas, Gershom. Of the descendants of Ithamar, Daniel. Of the descendants of David, Hattush. Of the descendants of, and okay, I quit right there. So it goes on for a very long time. If you have trouble sleeping tonight, go back and read that. You'll go right to sleep. We're looking at verse 15. I think it's 15. I assembled them at the canal that flows toward Ahava, and we camped there 3 days. When I checked among the people and the priests, I found no Levites there, so I summoned Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jarib, Elnathan, Elnathan and Elnathan. Is that right? Yeah. Elnathan and Elnathan, and then Nathan, who I'm assuming was the brother of Elnathan and Elnathan, Zechariah and Meshullam, who were leaders, and Joiarib and Elnathan, who were men of learning, and apparently Elnathan was the favorite name of the year there. And I sent them to Iddo, the leader in Casaphia. I told them what to say to Iddo and his kinsmen, the temple servants in Casaphia, so that they might bring attendance to us for the house of our God. Because the gracious hand of our God was on us, they brought us Sherebiah, a capable man from the descendants of Mali, a son of Levi, the son of Israel, and Sherebiah's sons and brothers, men, and Hashabiah, together with Jeshiah from the descendants of Merari, and his brothers and nephews, men. They also brought 220 of the temple servants, a body that David and the officials had established to assist the Levites. All were registered by name. So, in a nutshell, wisely, Ezra gathered 18 men who were the heads of Jewish families, knowing that they could influence their relatives, and the result was a total of 1,515 men, plus women and children, who agreed to go with Ezra to Jerusalem. It wasn't as large a company as the first contingent that had gone with Zerubbabel and Joshua nearly 80 years before, but that didn't discourage them. If you compare the names in this list with those in Ezra chapter 2, verse 3 through 15, you'll see that many of Ezra's companions were related to the first settlers that came. The pioneer spirit seems to run in families. The group left Babylon on the first day of the 5th month, and after about a week of travel, stopped at the river Ahava for 3 days before proceeding. During that time, Ezra took inventory of the people and discovered that there were no Levites going with them. So he sent a special committee of 11 leading men to recruit some Levites for the journey. The committee returned with only 38 Levites, but 220 temple servants came along with them. It's too bad the numbers weren't reversed, but even then the laborers were few, but sufficient. All right, verse 21. So do you get it? They're heading back, and I told you last week, it's too bad we don't have any of the details of that journey that they took, which was 4 months, I think it was 4 months long, but we do have one detail, only one, but we have that one detail. That is, they came up to this river on the first day, and then he decided to take inventory just to make sure he's got enough of everybody, and realized he didn't have a single Levite with him. So he thought, well, we can't go without Levites. So he sent them back to, I guess, make a second appeal, and he got him some Levites and some temple attendants as well. Verse 21. If at first you don't succeed, go back and make a second plea. There, by the Ahava Canal, I proclaimed a fast so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for a safe journey for us and our children with all of our possessions. I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from enemies on the road, because we had told the king, the gracious hand of our God is on everyone who looks to him, but his great anger is against all who forsake him. So we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. Now here's what I find a little bit humorous about this. He said, we got out there and we realized we don't have a single soldier to protect us. And it was a vicious world. You know, it was 1,500 years ago. 2,500 years ago. Yes, 2,500 years ago. And so it was a barbaric, violent world. And they're out there completely unprotected with women and children. And those priests and Levites aren't going to protect them. Who's going to protect them? Well, he had told the king, so he thought to himself, you know what? It would have been really good had we had asked the king for some soldiers to protect us on the journey, because it's 4 months. But he didn't ask the king. What he had said to the king instead was, basically, God's going to take care of us. He's going to bless us, and he's going to curse anybody that messes with us. And now he's thinking back on that, and he says, I was ashamed to tell the king after I bragged on God. I was ashamed to tell the king that we needed an escort, so I didn't say anything to him. So now he's called his own bluff. He's out there, and he realizes the only way they're going to make it is by the hand of God. And so since it's only the hand of God, which of course ends up being enough, they don't have any trouble at all getting there, because God did protect them. But he thought, well, since it's the hand of God, I think we'll take a little time and pray and fast so that we appeal to God for his protection. Bless you. So that's what happens, or happened. So we fasted in verse 23 and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. Many of the Jews were comfortable in Mesopotamia and quite satisfied to live and die there. During the captivity, they followed Jeremiah's counsel to be good citizens and settle down to normal lives, and so that's what they did. Over the decades, the old generation had died and a new generation had arisen that had never seen Jerusalem or the temple, and probably had little interest in the welfare of their fellow Jews sacrificially laboring there. No doubt some of the Jewish men were in government, employ, or in business, and were unable to relocate without paying a great price. Even Jesus had a problem enlisting disciples who were too settled in their successful lifestyles. Remember, Jesus called and gave an invitation to a wealthy young man to come and follow him. The same invitation that he gave the 12 disciples, and he declined the invitation because he was wealthy and would not leave it. Verse 24. Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, together with Sherebiah, Hashabiah. So it's Sherebiah and Hashabiah. I'm assuming they're related, and 10 of their brothers. Oh, yeah, they were. And I weighed out to them the offering of silver and gold, and the articles that the king, his advisors, his officials, and all Israel present there had donated for the house of our God. I weighed out to them 650 talents of silver, silver articles weighing 100 talents of gold, 20 bowls of gold valued at 1,000 darics, and 2 fine articles of polished bronze as precious as gold. I said to them, you as well as these articles are consecrated to the Lord. The silver and the gold are a free will offering to the Lord, the God of your fathers. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the house of the Lord in Jerusalem before the leading priests and the Levites and the family heads of Israel. Then the priests and Levites received the silver and gold and sacred articles that had been weighed out to be taken to the house of our God in Jerusalem. So to 12 leading priests, Ezra committed the responsibility for the treasure. 25, listen to this, because it's in their weight, the talents and another weight that I didn't recognize. 25 tons of silver, nearly 8 tons of silver and gold vessels, plus various other vessels, and the offering given by the people. So this is a lot of treasure. 25 tons of silver and 8 tons of silver and gold vessels. The 12 men represented the 12 tribes of Israel and had an obligation to them. But even more, it was the Lord's treasure, and these priests would one day give an accounting to him. In one sense, this event is a parable of the Christian life. God's people are on a difficult and dangerous journey to the heavenly Jerusalem, and Christ has committed certain of his treasures to us. Our task is to protect what he's given us and be ready to give a good account of our stewardship when we get to the end of the journey. The only difference between this passage in Ezra and our life is that in our journey, God expects us to invest and increase the treasure and not just guard it. Remember the parable of the talents, Matthew 25. God expects us to invest the gifts that he's given us, that he's entrusted us, and to increase. Verse 31. On the 12th day of the first month, we set out from the Ahava Canal to go to Jerusalem. The hand of our God was on us, and he protected us from enemies and bandits along the way. So we arrived in Jerusalem, where we rested 3 days. So they left Babylon on the first day of the first month, tarried 3 days at the Ahava Canal, and then left that encampment on the 12th day of the first month, arriving in Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month. So they covered at least 900 miles in 4 months' time. Now again, to do that with your family is one thing, but to do it with a large group, and this was a tiny group compared to the others, but they had over 1,500 men, plus women and children, so you can probably just about double that. And so instead of 1,500, they actually have 3,000 adults, plus children, so they probably have 4,000 to 5,000 people. So you can imagine 2,500 years ago, walking with 2,500 men, women, and children for 4 months, all day, every day. Well, I can't wrap my head around that, but that's what they did. So, needless to say, it's an understatement. when we arrived in Jerusalem, where we'd rested for 3 days. I'd want more than 3 days, but they rested for 3 days. Verse 33, on the fourth day, in the house of our God, we weighed out the silver and gold and the sacred articles into the hands of Meremoth, son of Uriah the priest. Eleazar, son of Phinehas, was with him, and so were the Levites, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, and Noadiah, son of Binnui. Everything was accounted for by number and weight, and the entire weight was recorded at that time. Then the exiles who had returned from captivity sacrificed burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 male lambs, as a sin offering, 12 male goats. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. So the Jewish residents that were already there and the new arrivals gathered at the altar to worship God and declare their unity as his people. The 12 burnt offerings and 12 sin offerings were for the 12 tribes Israel represented by the Jewish remnant in Jerusalem. Unlike the initial worship service over 70 years before, when the altar was first set up, there's no record of anybody lamenting for the good old days. Remember that first great worship service they had? They were all crying, as I said last week. Some of them were crying because they were happy, some crying for their sad. Now it's just all happy. The new arrivals were worshiping in their land, their homeland, at their temple altar for the first time in their lives for every one of these people. There's no previous generation left. It's been too long. Every one of these people, it's the first time they've ever seen the temple. It's the only temple they've ever seen to God. And they're worshiping there at that altar for the first time in their life. Okay, verse 36. They also delivered the king's orders to the royal satraps and to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, who then gave assistance to the people and to the house of God. All right, that's it. That's where we are. We're right in the middle, but I didn't want to get into the last 2 chapters until next week because a lot happens in those 2 chapters. Any comments or questions? It's easy to blur this all in as one event, when in fact it was 3 separate events in separate generations that took place. Really, all of this, as far as importance, it's all important. Again, we're going to see the problems next week that happen in the spiritual revival that takes place under the leadership of Ezra, which facilitates what's going to happen with Nehemiah, which is just really critical. But Nehemiah is exciting. You want to be a part of the study of the book of Nehemiah and all that God does through Nehemiah. But next week is really important. If you've ever been to revival, you'll want to see what happens next week. You've never been to revival quite like this because your marriage was not dissolved in the revival. And a lot of theirs will be. We'll see that next time. Any comments or questions before we look at our prayer sheet for the week? All right, let's look at our prayer sheet. If you don't have a prayer sheet, raise your hand.